This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi everyone, my name is Kądzielska-Koper and this is Common Sense Generation. With me is William Richardsson, writer, journalist, traveler, vagabond, and an entrepreneur. Will, thank you very much for coming.
Mm-hmm. I would emphasize, thank you for having me. It's good to see you again. I would emphasize vagabond, I think. I don't want people coming to me for money, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. This show is about common sense, and sometimes a lot of it and lack of it. And right now, you are an American, but most of your life you live in Europe. Funny thing, it seems like the continent is maybe, more habitual for you than the US. But right now that a lot of young Americans, they all want to make a revolution, and they all identify as communists. Which is a funny thing, because they actually, usually they have never seen in their own eyes what communism is. You've seen some of it. You've seen the post-Soviet bloc and how the life looked like here. So my first question is, of course, have you ever identified as a communist?
What is this, the McCarthy Army hearings? Great Scott, I feel like Arthur Miller. I mean, but only because I'm being accused of being a communist, not in any other way. You know? But he's even taller than I am. He was. Have I ever been a communist? No. I'm from Virginia originally, and actually, it's very curious because yes, I have lived in Europe a long time, but off and on, I've always kept one foot in the United States and one foot sort of here in Europe, first in Great Britain, and then, or the United Kingdom, or whatever people call it now, wish to call it now. Mostly in England, but I spent a year in Scotland at university. I studied in London. I also studied in the United States, in Georgia, in Atlanta. So I've always kept as I say, sort of straddled the ocean, if you will. So I'm very aware. I follow the news, being originally a journalist, and actually first a teacher, then a journalist. I naturally follow the news. I really keep up with what's going on.
So you keep up with a young generation.
Yeah, but I like Europe. This is the point. I always wanted, you see, once I studied, first of all, I always wanted to travel. Second of all, I was lucky enough to get a couple of scholarships so I could afford to do it, and live abroad. So the first trip I made was, I was a student in Paris for a summer, studying French badly. I was terrible.
And this didn't make you a communist?
No, I was reading a lot of French literature, and of course a lot of the French literature contains Marxist thought. I also went to the London School of Economics later, and of course that was started by Bernard Shaw, one of the founders, and Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who are founders of the Labour Party, the Fabian Society, which became the Labour Party, and they founded the LSE, the London School of Economics. So I've been around these kind of things. But coming from my background, I'm growing up in Virginia and Georgia, being a Southerner, being one whose family has fought in every war since the beginning of the country, and even the French and Indian War, before the country existed, both sides.
So now you're trying to boast about the bravery of your family.
I'm not, I'm just saying they've been there that long, and it, sort of people just, I had some who were British loyalists in my family too, during the Revolution.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so no, it's not actually bragging. It's just saying there's a long tradition in my family of being there. They didn't come last week, last year, 20 years ago, or even 100 years ago. They were well, established.
So this American
long
free
time.
spirit of free people.
So communism has no place. I never understood it. I mean, I read Marx, but I didn't understand what possible value this could have to an American.
But this right now, it's like one of the most, so many young people just say go around, especially at the universities, saying, "Oh, I'm a communist." And
Well,
what
they
do
don't know. I mean, one has flirtations when one is young because you don't have any stake in the game. You don't own any property usually, or mommy and daddy pay for everything. A lot of these kids are very well off, and they have leisure time to go around saying they're communists. But really, the communists, shouldn't they come from the poorer classes and the less well-off classes and the working class? I mean, that's what Marx said. This is pretty basic to understand communism. Uniting the workers of the world, but yet it seems to be the upper middle class that is leading this sort of dream. The fact is that you're absolutely correct that I came here to find out two things from London on my first trip, was to write a travel story. And one thing I wanted to find out, just at the beginning, I knew I was going to make a lot of trips. I just had a feeling. I didn't know I would live here. Lived there in Central Europe. But I had the idea that I would make a lot of trips because it was already very fascinating to me. This is the very beginning of just after the round table. No, just after the round table. So I was a student. I had been a student in UK, then I was teaching, and I had just started freelancing and getting published. Wow, this is amazing.
It's always good for any...
In papers, where there were lots of, there were big stacks of them everywhere, and you find your article in there. It was amazing.
A beautiful moment.
Yeah, it was great, yeah. So I wanted to find out why, when Poland is unstable, there are always big wars. And we see, again, why when Central Europe, particularly Poland, is unstable, there are wars or big conflicts that can, end up burning right across Europe. And the other thing I wanted to find out was what communism had really done visually and psychologically by seeing it and talking to people.
This is something what we actually should talk about, because when you look at the things around right now, less Europe, Czech Republic, Slovakia, because all of those countries are flourishing right now and rebuilding things, changing. But you can see a lot of this still in Ukraine. Right now, of course, the war, so it's even worse. But you see the grayness, you see the Soviet blocks where people live in those small apartments, where the infrastructure is different, and when there are very little old buildings, stone houses, because everything was destroyed. This old heritage of the past was an enemy of the Soviets. And even if it was not destroyed during the World War II, then later it was not renovated, because who cared?
Yeah. I spent the last 5 years doing travel stories for television about Poland. I've been all over the country. I mean, it's a long time since the first time I was here, and I did see many of the transitions. I also lived in which told you about, the great contrast between color and lack of color, which you just highlighted, which is the most amazing thing that you notice. I mean, to me, it was like Jean-Luc Godard's film Alphaville when I first came to Warsaw. It's a black and white detective film, very stark, very futuristic, and that's what Warsaw was like to me. I said, oh my God, this is Godard's vision right here, in front of me.
But that's actually what communism
in the early 90s.
It takes out the colors usually. It builds a culture and a society and a surrounding with people who are supposed to be the same buildings, the same apartments, the same staircases, and everything is gray.
The same pleasures.
The same pleasures, the same clothes.
Yeah.
And then people are, they try to get their freedom in different ways, because that's what usually people are about to. But this is the thing that the communism bring the standard grayness and poverty to many, and that there is a very, very small upper class, or the high class, which is usually a high class of...
It's another class system. It's just a much more rarefied, smaller upper class. But it's the same idea, and there's far less mobility.
Absolutely.
There's less mobility than Ben-Hur had as a slave within the Roman Empire. Okay, all right. It was a great
Poor
story,
Ben-Hur.
right?
Yeah, but it's a great
but
story.
Similar. It shows that there was more fluidity in Roman society than there was in communism. Okay, so kids don't have a stake, or they don't have a stake because either they're being paid for, or they're thinking about utopianism instead of empiricism, the empirical things that have to happen in their life to achieve a goal they may have. But what are their goals? I had goals when I was 22, the things I wanted to do, and I've done every one of them that I wrote down in my journal at the time. I have done all of those things.
I guess that when you were young, usually...
And I didn't have a lot of money to do them in the beginning. It was really just me pushing to do them.
But there is this feeling among young people right now that they will never achieve what their parents achieved. That they will.
That's it. Yeah.
That they cannot be CEOs of companies. That they or sometimes they don't even want to climb the ladder in any big corporation or anything. So they are lack of motivation, and this lack of motivation and perspective very often leads them to this phrase, I want to make a revolution, I want to destroy the system is horrible.
Most of these people couldn't even box their way out of a bar fight. It's ridiculous, it's silly. I see women out there, it's like, stop it, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Unless you want to be like Angela Davis and grab a machine gun.
Have you heard that young students across Europe are at the universities are protesting, and they are identifying as Hamas?
Yeah.
And
yeah. I'm going to a Pride for Hamas meeting right after this.
Really? Do you want to take any hostage?
No, this is what I mean. It's ridiculous, isn't it? The idea is ridiculous that Hamas is your friend. They're not anybody's friend. They're not even friendly to themselves.
Now, a lot of young people with totally different background, having not even being Muslims, they identify as Hamas right now, whatever they are protesting against.
Have they read a book? Have they read anything? Do they even know where Israel is? Have they ever been outside of the United States, except for maybe Tijuana or a Caribbean cruise when they graduated high school? This is the first question you have to ask. Who are you talking to? And what is their background? Because a lot of these people are pig ignorant.
Okay, but now if you want to, one thing is to criticize them. But if you put themselves in their shoes, like you are a 19-year-old
yeah, I remember.
Will,
sure,
growing right now in somewhere, raised up in US, and you managed to go to college, and now you're part of the protest because you feel that our environment is dying. There is this.
Well, this is the key word: feel. What does feel have to do with thinking? Nothing. Except for intuitive leaps, like Einstein had when he discovered relativity. But what does feeling have to do with thinking? Very, very little. If you say to me, what are they thinking? I would say, yeah, I'd like to know. I know what they're feeling. And it's an emotional reaction to feeling, to the idea that they're put down. But they're not put down, they're just young. It's tough for everybody when you're young. This is the easiest time, or at least since World War II ended, to be young. The whole creation of the teenage culture. That never existed before. Nobody cared what teenagers thought. It was get over there and do what I told you to do, or they run off and jump on the railroad and hobo across the United States, for example, or get on a boat and go to the United States. The United States has always been a place for freedom. You say, oh gosh, I'm going to go there. I can have freedom there. It doesn't matter what I do. I'm an American, or I'm in America. This was the great thing. Why would anyone want to trade? And also, the leadership of the world, inspired by Western culture, for subservience to an Asian culture. Look at the history of Asian culture. It's not very pretty. You have to think of, often in life, common sense means the lesser of two evils and coming to grips with it. But at least in our system, meaning the lesser of two evils, which is worse, communism or let's call it totalitarianism, because that's really what it is, whether it comes from the right or the left.
But I think it's also something changing the perspective. So
Yeah.
the change of perspective is the fact that suddenly you feel low about yourself, you feel unhappy about the place where you are.
It's called being young.
But then the right path
And it's good.
the right path is to start to change yourself, which is of course extremely difficult, rather than to change the world.
Work and perseverance, working hard, reading every book you can get hold of, and actually understand this. So if you want to be a Marxist, read about Marxism and read about his life and who he was as a person. It's not a very pretty picture, actually. He was kind of a bum, living off capitalism. Thank you very much. Just like, I'm not saying these kids are bums. I'm saying they're young, and when you're young, you're more liberal,
Absolutely, very often it is.
Or more left. Because you have no stake in the game. But as you get older, you have kids, you have responsibilities, taking care of maybe your parents, grandparents. You have responsibilities. You have responsibility to colleagues you work with. You have to start thinking, actually, more collectively. Because right now, when they're young, they don't have to think actually collectively in a common sense way. But as you get older, you become responsible. If you work in a company, for the work that you do that is related to all the other people in the company, and in the end to the end product of the company. These things are very important, and they teach you how to persevere. When you write something, you have to stand behind what you write. That's your name. You better be sure about what you're saying, and that it's what you think and feel. Then you can start feeling. Because a lot of writing and art, of course, that's where the emotions need to come to the front, not just intellectualizing things. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about common sense, which is looking at the facts as they are. For example, which system do you want to work under? Do you want to live under? Totalitarian, communist, dictatorial leaders, or a place where you can criticize and make jokes about both presidential candidates? Fantastic. I'm going to choose the second one,
Very often, and we see it throughout the pandemic, the people actually are more eager to give up a lot of their freedoms for less chaos and for less their own decisions than choosing a hard path to standing up to the hierarchy of power. You remember pandemics where forests were closed up, parks were closed up for some time, and people actually obeyed this. They stayed in their apartments. Yeah. They went to the shops instead of going to a park or a forest because the government said so, which right now, of course, we look at.
See people in the park now with wearing these masks that don't work. I mean, you have to have an actual professional mask for it to work. These masks don't work at all. They might stop some germs, but they're not going to stop,
but then
a virus.
Then they sit alone in the car and still wearing a mask because the government said so. So when I look at this perspective, a common sense appears to me as an ability to not only judge and think for yourself, but have enough courage and bravery to act as you think, despite the hierarchy of power, despite the fact that people around you or institutions around you give different rules.
Yes, but the neo-Marxists are attacking even the idea of logic, even the idea of history. I mean, if the first thing you want to do is stop, make people feel, don't let them think. Empiricism is the enemy of people who want to control you by making you emotional, which is what all these left-wing ideas, or right-wing, if there's just not many right now, but that's happened in the past too, extreme right-wing stuff. But right now we're talking about these left-wing, tail wagging the dog ideas that everybody knows about. I don't have to say what they are right now, because we live with them every day. These are red herrings, you see, and it's a very small minority talking a lot. For example, why do we have a Pride Month?
Why, exactly?
Why is there a Pride Month? Why is there Black History Month? Why isn't there a White History Month? You know, it's ridiculous. We're all in this together. And there have been laws enacted in the United States and over Europe to protect the classes of people who faced prejudice before. I'm going to call it not discrimination. I hate the word. I don't like racism as a word, but prejudice is real. Prejudice operates in everybody's life all the time, and that's what and bigotry, and that we have to. That's what we have to deal with. It's a very simple concept. They are different from me. I got to be tolerant. I'm going to be tolerant because they're different, and I might learn something. But at least I'll then have a give and take so I can make a common sense decision. Common Sense, the title of Thomas Paine's great pamphlet, which aided the American Revolution. It was one of the main intellectual treatises behind the American Revolution, the inspiration, like the Declaration of Independence, like Thomas Jefferson's writing, Ben Franklin's writings, you see. These were instrumental. But the 18th century, Edmund Burke, also on the British side, who people think of as a conservative, but actually it was called liberal thought at that time.
And he was a huge advocate of common sense.
Yes, he was.
As a value, as a British value.
Because empiricism, because how do you solve problems? You can't just solve problems by feeling. I mean, you have a mathematical problem or an engineering problem, for example, or a business problem, or even writing a book. There are certain practical considerations. How much time am I going to spend writing? How much can I justify the time for this article, for example, versus what I'm getting paid? Or does the subject I don't even care if I'm getting paid. I've got to write this subject, which has been the case with me many times, starting out and then selling it later. And some pretty hairy situations too, I can tell you. But so thinking about things and having a common sense or empirical approach was the heart of the 18th century. This is everywhere under attack on the extreme left. And so we have to defeat them with common sense, which is why I like the title of your show.
And common sense is also the element of courage that you take risk, that you want to take risk in your life on different levels.
Life is a risk.
Because right now...
Life is a risk from the very moment you take your first breath. That's when the risk begins. That's the only free ride you get in life.
Isn't it like right now that we are encouraged to live in a zero risk society?
It's impossible.
A society when you don't own anything.
Yeah.
So then you only rent. You rent your apartment, you rent your house, you rent your car.
I'm not sure I believe this.
You rent your phone and you rent your
idea.
computer.
Do you think this is really going to happen? I think that people are, 50%, I would say in America even 75% of people are against this kind of idea. But you have a very vocal 25% on the extreme left who get a lot more credit than they deserve because a lot of media voices support them because they come from that northeast corridor of coddled backgrounds.
But then you have, for example, a huge hero of all, many students. I was recently watching Gilmore Girls, a very, old show, a classic, a cool one. And then you enter Rory Gilmore room at Yale. On the wall is hanging no one else but Noam Chomsky. And then you ask yourself, why are they promoting him? Why upper
Noam's
class?
an interesting guy, that's why. So is Gore Vidal. They're very left-wing and great, but they're very entertaining, very thoughtful.
He hates America. You know that Noam Chomsky hates US.
I don't think he hates America. I think that he thinks, let's try to get inside Noam Chomsky's head. It's not easy. Because
he's 95 years old and recently almost died.
That's what I heard, yeah.
But still alive.
Yeah, I checked that immediately when I saw that rumor. you don't agree with him on a lot of things. I mean, his language theories, for example, which are the bedrock of his career, are fascinating and the best work since Wittgenstein. But if you look at Noam Chomsky, you might not agree with him, but it's good exercise for fighting those thoughts, because he is a utopianist. And it comes out, even out of this early socialist, turn of the century, 20th century, turn of the 20th century, so 120 some years ago, anarchist socialist movement. A lot of his ideas do. And then, of course, those were refined over time with the postmodernist thinkers after the Second World War, who saw America as the single most important power, which for people with my background, who've been in America forever, was confusing. I mean, you know, we love the country, but we look at that and we say, well, we're not supposed, that's not what Washington said in his final address. We were not supposed, his farewell address, after being president for 2 terms, we were not supposed to be in charge. We were supposed to stay out of everybody's business. That's why people came here, because they didn't want to be involved in that stuff. The compromise we made was to open up the world to free trade. That was our compromise. Okay, we'll take the leadership, but we'll make some make some money and make business.
Free passage through Pacific.
Just open up trade routes for everyone, including that, but protecting the high seas with the American Navy. That's what created trade, and anyone could put their boat on the high seas without pirates.
That's true. That's true.
After World War II.
We're wrapping up this episode, Will. So just a final advice. You are 19-year-old right now. 3 things. What do you think the people should do?
It's hard. I think I remember I can tell you what I did when I was 19. I studied hard and worked hard. I had fun. I made friends. I read voraciously. I ate books for years. Until I ate books throughout my 20s. I just read all the time. Always had a book. Read, and it's not enough to do it on your phone. That's your time to do it. That's the time to investigate all of these things at the source. Read Marx. If you want to be a Marxist, read Marx. And then read the history of the Soviet Union, of Cuba, and other places where China. Read about what Mao did. Read about what Stalin particularly did, but also look at Lenin and Trotsky. Very important to understand the roots of these things. And then look at the history of the West. Not perfect, but you can criticize it. You can criticize it. And this is the key to common sense, being able to criticize the ruling elite and the habitual behaviors of society.
William Richardsson in Common Sense Generation. This was his advice to young people. Thank you for watching. And I also thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.